All right, in this video, we're going to talk about two things. First, we're going to talk about session variables, and then we're going to talk about functions within classes. So when we have the first variables we talked about were the get variable, like this variable here, get, and post, like this variable here, post, okay? A post variable, remember, comes from a post request, which is in a form, okay? Here's your method post. So it sends the variables from the form up into this post request, and you're able to access those variables using this post. Okay. Now, a get variable here, remember, comes from the URL. Okay. The URL will have an ID or something, some variable name, and then it'll have an equal sign, and it will have a variable, and that's what the get will do, is it'll get it out of the URL. Okay. A third kind of variable is a session variable. Okay, and now the session variable has, unlike get, which is just in the URL, or post, which is just in the form, session sets a variable for the duration of the session. It stores it in a cookie. Okay, so in this session, in the session class, notice we have three variables. Before we only had two. We had the username and an admin ID. And notice that the username, you could say, oh, this is going to be Brian's app. I set the username right when the person logs in. Okay, I'll set the username, and then throughout the application, I can say, hey, welcome, Brian. Okay. Well, why not have one called user ID? So we can also access this session user ID on any function or on any page that we need to know what user it is, especially in this multi-user environment. Okay, and let me show you an example. On our bank class, down here in our let's find everything about this user ID, we could say, hey, select all from bank, where the user ID is equal to the session user ID, and return it and run it through the SQL function. Okay, so that's how we would use the session variable. Okay, now the second thing I want to talk about was this function within a class. Now, notice in our last projects, we did all of our variables through the database object class. So each of these functions were right in here. We set the database, we find by SQL, we do our update, our create, and our delete. Okay, it was all done right through the database object class. But what if we don't want to find everybody in this table? Instead, we want to find all based off the username. Okay, so we want to find, say, all the banks where the bank accounts where that user has all their bank accounts. So we wouldn't put that in the database object because it's specific to the bank class. So in here, we would just say, you know what? Let's find all. It should have said find all bank based on user ID. So find all bank user ID. Okay. And then notice this next one, it says find this month all banks. Okay, so this is the name of the function, and we're passing in the user ID. Okay, now there's two things you can do. You could either pass in the user ID like this, or you don't have to pass anything in. You can just get the session user ID like this. So that's just two different ways of doing it. It does the same thing. Okay, now this doesn't actually do anything. This is just where we put the function. We actually have to call it. So if we look at our bank index file, we'll notice that this is where we call find all user right here. Okay, and we know it's from bank because we have the class here. Okay, and what are we doing? Well, we know that find all user ID is going to return us all the bank accounts for that user. Okay, so we put all of those bank accounts into an array called banks, and then we break down that array of banks into different rows called bank. And then for each row, we output the bank ID, and we use that bank ID to come down here and tell us how much what bank it is, what the URL is for the bank, and so forth. Okay, and the same thing here. Look, we have our account. Okay, so here's our account object class, and in that account object class, we should say find the sum of funds. and pass in the bank ID, okay? The bank ID that we got here, okay? So let's go and look at account, which is the account class, and find some funds, okay? And notice that it says select all, and it gives us returns us where that specific bank ID. Okay, so it gives us all the account information grouped by order, by date, descending limit 1. So it gives us the latest bank balance for that bank, okay, of all the different funds. Okay, and that's why when you come into here, it will tell you how much that was, the value is for that one. Okay, and it just runs through that loop. All right. So this very short video, we talked about a session variable, and we talked about using functions, specific functions to the classes. I hope this helps.